Shalom, everyone. And just to follow on from that prayer for the safety of all the citizens of Israel, and indeed the safety of all who are living in the Middle East, and both Jewish and Arab. We are, of course, appalled by the turn of events in Israel, both from our external enemies and even more ominously from our own Arab citizens. It's really just shocking that the people who live together just can't. There's terrible tensions and hatreds that spill out at times like that, and it's times like this, and it's just very, very upsetting. And it has to be said that no country in the world would tolerate being attacked by a barrage of rockets without responding with force, and Israel has every legitimate right to respond. But at the same time, the stress and the destruction to which it submits everyone in the area is shocking. And a cessation of hostilities simply can't come soon enough. I understand that both parties need to make their point, and let's just hope it's made as quickly as possible, and that the matter can be quietened down, because there is so much destruction and death. But we stand in solidarity with Israel, and we express our deep compassion for all innocent parties so caught up in the conflict. My thought for the week I penned just before the hostilities, and I want to turn attention to some other matters so that we don't become totally obsessed by the matters in Israel. So my thoughts are on the parasha, and I'm sure that some of the sentiments that I should be expressing apply in the Israel situation as well. So in 2017, Tim Marshall, who was a distinguished British journalist, published a book called A Flag Worth Dying For. And in it, apart from a whole plethora of useless facts and oddities, such as, did you know that the world's tallest unsupported flagpole resides in Saudi Arabia's second city, Jeddah? The flag weighs 1,250 pounds, or about the same as 5 baby elephants, something which every person should know. Or that Denmark's was the most burned flag in 2006, because in September 2005, a Danish newspaper published 12 cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. But moving away from those useless pieces of information, he explains how flags and the power of flags and their symbols are used to unite and to divide populations and to intimidate enemies. The world is a very confusing place right now, he says, and that's for sure. And we need to understand the symbols, old and new, that people rally around, because for thousands of years, flags have represented our hopes and our dreams. And we wave them, and we burn them, and we march under their colors. And still, even in the 21st century, as we see even right now as we speak, certainly in the Middle East, we continue to die for them. But take as an example our own flag, the Union Jack, the de facto national flag of the United Kingdom. And it's composed of 3 flags, as you probably know: the St. George's Cross representing England, the St. Andrew's Cross representing Scotland, and the St. Patrick's Cross representing Ireland. By the way, the St. David's Cross representing Wales doesn't appear in the Union flag, because when the Union flag was created first in 1606, the Principality of Wales was already united with England, so it got left out. The Union flag, or Union Jack as it's known, is a very powerful symbol of the United Kingdom. And yet today, continuing and persistent nationalist allegiance to the individual flags that are included in it threatens to tear the whole Union apart. Marshall claims that flags are a relatively recent phenomenon in human history. Standards and symbols painted in cloth predate flags, and they were used by the ancient Egyptians and by the Assyrians and by the Romans. But actually, it was the technical invention of silk by the Chinese that allowed flags, as we know them today, to flourish and spread, because silk is lighter than traditional cloth. It could be held aloft, unfurled, and it could flutter in the wind. So in mentioning the Egyptians, the Assyrians, and the Romans, Tim Marshall forgot to read his Bible. And more specifically, he forgot to read this week's Parsha. Because in describing the camping and the traveling arrangements for the Israelites, the Torah says, Ish al diglo vatot levet avatam, each man at his banner with the insignia of the patrilineal house, and that's the way the children of Israel shall encamp. So the 12 tribes were arranged in a square around the Mishkan, the sanctuary in the center, and there were 3 tribes camped in each of the directions, and each one had their own degel, their own pennant, own flag, but they were subsumed under the degel, the flag of the lead tribe for that particular direction. Judah in the east, Ephraim in the west, Dan in the north, Reuven in the south. Well, there's a fascinating midrash that says that Moses was very unhappy about using these flags to mark the location of each tribe because he was concerned that it would lead to intertribal discord. Tribes whose flags were subsumed under the main flag would be jealous of the lead tribe. Or perhaps each tribe would argue that their flag should be the one to lead in the journeying. It seems in this midrash that Moses understood the powerful symbolism of flags as a rallying point for tribal allegiance and their destructive as well as their constructive potential in encouraging nationalistic fervor. Because while flags can be a unifying force, they also contain the seeds of discord, as indeed we see in the Union Jack. Nevertheless, Moses' qualms were overruled, and the distinguishing feature of the Israelite encampment was the 12 individual banners subsumed under the 4 lead banners. And the reason why Moses was overruled, according to the 16th century commentator Rabbi Moshe Alshich, is because within this diversity of identities, there was a powerful overriding unifying theme. The symbols on each of the banners was the image of that tribe's stone in the high priest's breastplate, and the order of their formation followed the instructions handed down to each of the tribes by Jacob shortly before he died as to the way and the order in which his 12 sons should carry his coffin. And so they had a long history of togetherness and a sense of common destiny. And there was more that united them than divided them. In other words, notwithstanding the different characteristics of the tribes and their distinct identities and their pride in their group, they came to the recognition that holding together, remaining unified as a whole, was much more advantageous than each tribe marching off in its own direction. Well, when I wrote these words, I was thinking about the United Kingdom. But I'd venture to say that exactly the same words apply even more powerfully in the Middle East. We are, after all, cousins. We have a common history. We have a common great-great-great-grandparents. We come from the same source. We are astonishingly like each other. There has to come a point in time when we realize that being together, understanding the commonality between us, is going to take us all, every one of us, every human being in Israel and in the surrounding Arab countries, a lot closer to a much happier place, as we're beginning to discover in some of the accords with some of the other Arab nations around us, but which we haven't yet been able to figure out with those who are closest to us. And that has to be the hope for the future, that somewhere along the line, sense will prevail and we begin to understand that despite the distinct identities and the pride in our own flags, that holding together, remaining a unified whole, will be much more advantageous than each of these tribes marching off in their own directions and sometimes, as we see now, against each other. Shabbat Shalom.